I remember the way Clara looked the day I proposed. Barefoot on a rocky cliffside in Maine, hair wild from the wind, laughter still lingering in her throat when I dropped to one knee, the sunlight slicing through the ocean mist and lighting her up like something out of a dream. And she cried as she said yes, pulling me into her arms so tightly I felt like I belonged there forever. Back then, I didn't know that the same arms that made me feel whole would one day break me in half without even flinching, that the woman who once whispered "you're my home" would become the architect of my heartbreak. But I guess love always blinds you before it betrays you, and I was hopelessly in love. So much so that I ignored the little signs, the way Clara started staying out later after her mother's diagnosis, the way her phone was always turned upside down, how she grew quieter, her touch more distant. But I told myself it was grief, that she was just overwhelmed by watching her mother fade away. Day by day in that old family estate in Virginia where the cancer had wrapped around her bones and refused to let go. I told myself I'd be there for her no matter what, that this was our test, and I passed every one of them without realizing I was the only one still taking the exam, still showing up for a love that had already flunked me behind my back. When her mother finally passed, Clara called me at work sobbing, and I dropped everything, drove home in the rain, and held her on the kitchen floor like we were the only two people left in the world. She clutched my shirt like she'd drown without me, whispering how scared she was to face her sister Elaine again, how she didn't want to do the will reading alone, and I told her she wouldn't have to, that I'd be right beside her because that's what husbands do. But I had no idea that I was being dragged not into a moment of support, but into a trap where my heart would be publicly executed. I booked our flights, rented a car, and we arrived at the estate on a chilly Friday morning, the kind of morning that felt like it should have been sacred quiet. But even before we entered the parlor where the lawyer, Mr. Hargrove, waited with the sealed documents, I could feel something was off. The way Elaine avoided Clara's gaze, the way everyone kept looking at me and then quickly looking away, as if I'd walked into a surprise party, but the surprise was grief and betrayal, and the whole room already knew the punchline except me. We sat down, me holding her hand, and the reading began, mundane at first, jewelry for Elaine, money for the nieces, then a sudden shift when Mr. Hargrove paused, looked uncomfortable and said, "To my daughter Clara, I leave the family beach house in North Carolina, shared jointly with the man who made her smile again in my final days, David." And that was the moment the ground cracked open beneath me. "David?" I turned to Clara, who had frozen beside me, her hand limp in mine, eyes wide, mouth parted but silent, and I asked, low and trembling, "Who the hell is David?" But I already knew, didn't I? I just didn't want to believe it. But then Elaine scoffed, crossed her arms and said, "Oh come on Clara, tell him the truth, he deserves that much." And my wife turned to me with tears in her eyes and whispered, "I didn't mean for it to happen." And I laughed, not out of humor but out of devastation, because what kind of person cheats while her mother is dying? What kind of woman lets another man into her heart, her body, while her husband is still fighting for her from the sidelines? I stormed out, unable to breathe, and Clara chased after me, crying, grabbing at my arm and begging me to understand. But there was nothing to understand. She had already chosen, and the will just confirmed it. I spent that night in a cheap motel, staring at the ceiling, remembering the night we first made love, how she looked bathed in candlelight, how she whispered she wanted to grow old with me. And now I realize she probably whispered the same damn thing to David in the very beach house I was supposed to one day retire in with her. Over the next few days she tried to explain it away with sob stories. David was her mom's hospice nurse, they spent long nights talking, grief made her weak, he was just a mistake. But mistakes don't inherit half a house, mistakes don't get named in legal documents by dying mothers, mistakes don't replace wedding rings. The final straw was when I saw her and David together outside the estate 2 days later, laughing softly, him brushing hair from her cheek, her leaning in like they'd always belonged. And I realized then that she wasn't sorry she cheated. She was only sorry I found out in such a humiliating way. I left her there, drove home alone, and filed for divorce that same week, sending the papers to her via our lawyer with a simple note. "You don't get to bury me along with your mother." But revenge, sweet as it sounded, took time to ripen. Months passed, and I discovered something curious. The beach house Clara inherited was entangled with a zoning issue, one that prevented renovations or legal sale unless both owners, Clara and David, were present to sign off jointly every time. So I dug into records, found out that David, the Florence Nightingale of my betrayal, had a history of inappropriate relationships with patients, a past job where he was fired for boundary issues, and I compiled everything: emails, texts Clara accidentally left on our cloud account, messages between them mocking me, and I sent it to the North Carolina Real Estate Board, attaching a formal complaint that questioned David's eligibility to co-own property linked to care-related manipulation. Within weeks, the complaint went public, David lost his license, the media got wind, and the property deal froze indefinitely, forcing them both into legal hell, unable to sell or live in the beach house without dealing with the fallout of their own betrayal. Meanwhile, I sold our old home, quit my job, and took a sabbatical in Europe, where I met Lena, German photographer with laughter in her eyes and honesty in her soul, and for the first time in years I felt safe again. One night in a quiet town near the Alps, I told Lena everything and she didn't flinch or pity me. She just kissed my scarred heart and said, "What she threw away, someone else will treasure." And that was the moment I let Clara go for good, not out of anger but out of freedom. Months later Clara reached out, her voice trembling on voicemail, saying she missed me, that things with David had changed, that she wasn't sure she made the right decision, but by then it was too late. I didn't call back, didn't respond, and when she sent me a photo of the beach house, empty and overgrown with the caption, "Wish we'd had our chance," I simply replied, "We did, you gave it away." Now I tell our story not to stay bitter, but to remind people that betrayal doesn't define the end, what you do afterward does. I rebuilt my life from ashes Clara never thought I'd rise from. And while she's trapped in a house she can't escape with a man she never truly loved, I'm traveling the world with someone who sees me, chooses me, and wakes up beside me without needing a will or a deathbed to remind her who I am.